At a bustling train station, a young man stood reading a letter that had clearly ruined the start of his day. His name was Liam Theodore Battenberg, and it seemed his grandmother's heart was not merely anxious over his silence, but had burned black and turned entirely to ash. She was making it clear that his upcoming summer leave would come with expectations. Specifically, a royal marriage proposal that would lead nowhere, no matter how many of her letters he ignored. Theodore looked up from the page and said, "Ah, damn it." And a smile touched his face, showing he found it more amusing than truly concerning. His grandmother had not given up yet. She never gave up. His colleague, River Ross, appeared behind him and asked if the letter was about marriage. Theodore confirmed that at this point it had practically become an annual tradition. That every leave came with at least one marriage push or a nagging campaign telling him to start dating someone. River pointed out that love letters arrived for him at the Navy Department every single day. So options clearly existed, and Theodore asked him if all of that did not feel terrible and meaningless. River stared at him and asked, "What?" Theodore clarified that he meant love. Then he started walking, telling River to cut the useless small talk and share what his real summer plans were. River caught up and explained that he was heading to Gloucester Castle, where his uncle worked as a gardener for the Somerset family. They needed extra help, and he thought doing something useful was better than idling around. Plus, the air out there was fresh, and there was a nearby river for swimming. As Theodore listened, a memory washed over him. A colleague at the infirmary had once told him that he seemed to lack a desire for life, and hoped he would stop calculating everything with his head, and instead follow his heart. Because something wonderful would surely happen if he did. Returning to the present, Theodore asked River to confirm if his relative was in the South. River said, "What?" Perplexed by this sudden change, Theodore told him that he had changed his mind and wanted to join him on that wholesome summer trip. And River did not really know what to make of that answer. Meanwhile, at the Somerset mansion, two men were laughing together, completely relaxed and without a care in the world. One of them was Baron Howard, and he was telling Count Somerset that his niece was very well-mannered, had a lovely face, and that he had raised her quite admirably. A young woman named Vanessa Siren Somerset stood nearby, bowing her head as they discussed her like a piece of merchandise being evaluated at a market stall. Count Somerset asked if they should proceed as planned, and Baron Howard said that before the wedding, he wanted her virginity to be proven. When the Count called that an insult, the Baron brushed it off, saying a flawed product would not be introduced in a second marriage. And as long as her purity was confirmed, the Count could request whatever he wished, because he knew someone with an uncanny ability to assess such things. The casual cruelty of it was breathtaking. Vanessa's mind pulled her back to the day everything changed. A man named Mr. Watts informed her that since the title had passed to her uncle, she had no right to claim anything regarding the estate or the family line. And from that moment on, everything she ate, wore, and used would be decided by others, including her marriage once she came of age. Back in the present, she was crouching under a tree, vomiting. As she stood upright, she thought being called a product actually fit everything she had been through quite well. She noticed a spoiled pomegranate on the ground, and the phrase flawed product echoed within her with newfound weight. Then she caught the smell of tobacco smoke, and wondered who could be doing what in the garden at this hour. She walked around the base of the tree, and saw a man sitting underneath it, smoking, as though he did not have a single care in the world. And his name was Liam Theodore Battenberg, though she had no way of knowing that yet. Vanessa walked around the tree, expecting to find an ordinary gardener, only to discover a stranger sitting beneath the canopy with a cigarette pinched between his fingers and not a trace of worry on his face. She had never seen him before. The moment he glanced up and their eyes met, her confidence dissolved. "Excuse me?" she began nervously, but before she could say anything else, her maid Mary came running up, out of breath after searching all over the estate. Vanessa turned to ask if Mary knew who the man was. But when she looked back, he was gone. The only trace of his presence was the abandoned cigarette smoldering on the ground. For some reason, that encounter refused to leave her mind. Days passed, yet she still found herself gazing toward the gardens, wondering if she would ever see that mysterious gardener again. A week later, her interest had become too obvious to hide. High up in a fruit tree, River Ross noticed it immediately, while working alongside the man currently posing as his cousin, Liam Theodore Battenberg. River pointed out that Lady Vanessa had been following him around the estate for days, clearly wanting to talk to him. However, Theodore looked completely unbothered. "Do I have to?" he asked. He knew all too well how these situations usually played out. Either she had fallen in love at first sight or she wanted to know his name. Both possibilities sounded equally exhausting. River argued that telling her the truth would be kinder. After all, Theodore was not actually a gardener, and Vanessa used to play with River as a child, even if she no longer recognized him. Surely that connection was worth mentioning. Theodore merely chuckled. When River shifted the topic and suggested moving out of the cramped storage shed where he was sleeping, Theodore jumped down from the tree and reminded him that he was currently playing River Ross, the hard-working nephew of the head gardener. If he suddenly started living in luxury, his disguise would fall apart. If his disguise fell apart, his grandmother would find out. If his grandmother found out, he would be trapped in a ceremonial hall surrounded by nobles and marriage contracts. Theodore asked if River truly wanted such a tragic end for him, and River immediately backed off from the conversation. You know what? I cannot even argue with that logic anymore. After River left carrying a basket of fruit, Theodore remained beneath the tree, letting his gaze wander across the estate. This place intrigued him in a strange way. Everything seemed a bit dated. The artwork hanging in the hallways was unimpressive. The carpets were cheap. Even the family crest was crafted from brass instead of gold. By all standards, he should have found this estate dull and forgettable. Yet something kept drawing his attention back. Something about this place felt lonely. Before he could pinpoint what that feeling was, a pomegranate suddenly dropped from above. Theodore turned and discovered Vanessa standing nearby with a fallen pomegranate in her hands. She seemed to have appeared so quietly that he had not even heard her footsteps. For a moment, she just stood there gathering her courage. Then she asked if he could spare a few minutes to speak with her. Theodore immediately made an excuse about being busy, even though he was doing nothing at the moment. Vanessa ignored his excuse and stated that she had a proposal for him. That finally caught his interest. "A proposal?" he asked. She stepped forward, held out the fruit, and calmly declared that she wanted to buy him. Theodore stared at her. The world seemed to go still. Of all the things he expected to hear today, that phrase was not on the list. "Excuse me, you want to do what?" He thought to himself while Vanessa waited for an answer, completely serious. And just like that, Theodore realized this conversation was about to become far more interesting than he had anticipated. A week before Vanessa walked into the garden and attempted to buy a man, she was sitting with the only two people she trusted enough to discuss her circumstances. The atmosphere was half strategy session and half desperate comedy. Rosaline Fabian Winchester was proposing increasingly ridiculous escape plans, including borrowing her grandmother's old dress as part of some disguise. Her brother, Blair Fabian Winchester, looked up from his book and asked why she still kept such a thing. Rosaline reacted as if he had committed a crime simply by asking. Vanessa could not help but laugh at their bickering. She admitted that she missed the times when the three of them could joke around without worrying about marriage contracts and family politics. Then Blair suddenly asked if she would be willing to publicly announce that they were in a relationship. The question was so shocking that both girls immediately looked at him. Since Blair was already engaged, a scandal involving the heir of Marquis Winchester would cause immense problems for any marriage arrangement that Vanessa's uncle was trying to force upon her. Rosaline quickly agreed that a scandal would be useful, but made it clear she absolutely did not encourage a fake romance with her brother. She launched into a passionate tirade about how society claimed to be modern, while still treating a woman's virginity like a piece of property. Blair promised they would support whatever choice Vanessa made, whether she wanted to run away, disappear for a while, or directly oppose this arrangement. Vanessa thanked them, but she refused to drag her friends into her troubles. As she walked toward the window, seeking an answer of her own, her gaze rested on a man balancing on a ladder while picking fruit from a nearby tree. Rosaline noticed her staring, and remarked that Vanessa became oddly brave whenever an idea popped into her head. Blair told her to drop it. Experience had taught him that once Vanessa reached this state, no one could stop whatever was about to happen next. Not long after, Vanessa was standing under an awning with her maid, Mary. The two of them were secretly watching the man from afar. Mary explained that he was River Ross's nephew, a Navy petty officer who had fought in the Battle of Potsdam and had recently received leave as a reward. Supposedly, he decided to spend his vacation helping out with the gardening work. And according to Mary, almost every maid on the estate had lost her mind since his arrival. Vanessa listened carefully, Something about the name River Ross stirred an old memory buried deep within her childhood. Suddenly, she could almost see a younger version of herself racing through a garden while a young boy ran behind her, shouting for her to wait. The memory faded as quickly as it had appeared, leaving her standing there, looking at the man beneath the tree. Then a dangerous thought began to form. If someone wanted to prevent an item from being sold, the easiest solution was to damage it to the point that no one wanted it anymore. The logic was absurd. It was reckless. It was completely insane. Regrettably, it made total sense to a young woman who had just been called a product by the very people deciding her future. The man standing over there was someone she already knew, someone attractive enough to create a convincing scandal, and someone who had arrived at just the right time. Vanessa turned to Mary and calmly told her to go back inside, as she had an important matter to discuss with Mr. Ross. That decision eventually brought her to the garden. Theodore was standing beneath the tree with a fruit in his hand when Vanessa stepped up and casually informed him that she wanted to buy him. The declaration was so absurd that even Liam, who rarely reacted to anything, could not immediately process it. After a brief silence, he asked what exactly she meant. Vanessa replied that she meant precisely what she said. She wanted him to act as her lover for the duration of the summer, and she was willing to pay handsomely for the inconvenience. Theodore observed her for a moment before telling her to drop the polite phrasing and explain her true motive. The playful confidence vanished from her face. Taking a slow breath, Vanessa confessed that she needed a scandal significant enough to completely ruin her marriage prospects. She needed something that would remove her from consideration forever. Society valued her because she was seen as desirable. Therefore, the fastest way to escape was to make herself no longer desirable. The logic was harsh, but she had spent years living under harsh rules. Vanessa continued speaking, forcing herself to utter words she had never imagined saying aloud. It would be even better if she became pregnant. She promised compensation, protection, and enough money to ensure he would never suffer any consequences for helping her. When the summer ended, they could part ways and pretend nothing had ever happened. Theodore listened without interrupting. The garden fell silent around them. Finally, he reached out, took the fruit from her hand, and brought it to his mouth. For a few seconds, he simply looked at her. Not with shock, not with judgment, but purely with curiosity. Then he quietly asked a question that Vanessa was completely unprepared to hear. "What happens if the summer ends and you are still not tired of me?" Those words hit harder than any rejection, because for the first time since this plan began, Vanessa realized she had never considered what would happen if feelings became real. And judging by the faint amusement in Liam's eyes, he already knew it. Liam's question hung between them, and Vanessa flushed bright red before insisting that such a thing would never happen. To regain some control over the conversation, she adjusted her posture and informed him that he should address her properly as "my lady." Theodore looked at her for a moment before asking why he should bother doing that. If she wanted respect, she should have made a better offer. Currently, she was trying to sell herself cheap while paying him for the privilege. The remark landed heavily. Vanessa snapped back that money was the only thing she had left to offer. For the first time, Theodore fell silent, his mind drifting back to conversations he had overheard while working in the orchard. Maids whispering about a baron over 70 years old coming to inspect her. Others complaining that nobles had been visiting one after another ever since her graduation. Someone mentioning that her uncle's business ventures had failed. At the time, it was just idle gossip. Now it suddenly felt different. Now the woman standing before him was desperately trying to buy her way out of that exact future. Vanessa quickly explained that she had an allowance waiting for her, and if she had a child, she could apply to receive it. She promised annual payments for 5 years and insisted that if he wanted more, she would find a way to earn it. Unfortunately for her, Theodore calmly told her that money held little meaning to him. For a moment, she studied his expression. Then she revealed her trump card. She knew Mr. Ross had been embezzling maintenance funds for years. The garden's financial ledgers did not match, and she had gathered evidence to prove it. Theodore listened without any reaction. However, in his mind, he found himself unexpectedly amused. High society had thrown all kinds of offers at him before. Some offered wealth, some offered affection. Some wanted comfort, some wanted status. Vanessa's version was simply, "I want to buy you." It sounded absurd, yet it was far more interesting than almost anything else. He asked what an old gardener's crime had to do with him. Vanessa looked confused and reminded him that Mr. Ross was supposedly his uncle. Theodore immediately realized where the misunderstanding came from. Instead of correcting her, he pulled out a cigarette and lit it. Then he casually told her that if all she wanted was to spend the summer with him, she should stop making pathetic threats and just confess her feelings. Even Theodore knew he was deliberately giving her a wrong answer. Vanessa covered her nose to avoid the smoke and stated flatly that she was not in love with him. Saying otherwise would be a lie. Something about her answer irritated him more than usual. "Fine," he said. "Then the deal is off." Panic flashed across her face. She immediately asked if all she needed to do was claim that she loved him. Theodore gave a light laugh and tossed his cigarette onto the grass. The problem was not the words themselves. The problem was that he would never know whether she was threatening him or confessing to him. And if he felt nothing for her, then none of it really mattered anyway. Vanessa opened her mouth to ask what exactly that meant. Before she could finish speaking, Theodore stepped forward and kissed her. The question died instantly. Vanessa froze in place, too shocked to move. For a brief moment, the entire garden seemed to stop along with her. When they finally separated, she could only stare at him in disbelief, while Theodore observed her reaction with equal surprise. He had intended to throw her off balance and end the discussion. Instead, he found himself even more curious than before. Meanwhile, inside the mansion, Blair, Fabian Winchester happened to glance out the window and caught sight of the two in the garden. He immediately asked the butler who the man beside Vanessa was. The butler explained that he was supposedly the gardener's nephew, a naval officer on leave assisting with the estate's work. Blair continued observing through the glass. There was something about that face that felt familiar, very familiar. He quietly instructed the butler to gather information on that man. As he picked up his book once more, his gaze never left the garden. Whatever puzzle was forming in his mind, he had already begun piecing the fragments together. Inside the mansion, Blair, Fabian Winchester remained by the window, unable to shake the feeling that he had seen the gardener's nephew somewhere before. That thought kept turning over in his mind until Rosalind walked into the room and immediately asked who looked so familiar. The butler bowed politely as she entered, but Rosalind ignored all protocol and sank into a chair while staring out toward the gardens. She complained that preparing for the upcoming grand tour was utterly boring and confessed she wished Vanessa could join them. After all, Vanessa had generously let her stay at the castle before the trip, and every attempt to repay the favor had been firmly declined. Blair reminded her that Count Somerset was accelerating the marriage negotiations, making travel out of the question. Rosalind looked horrified. Vanessa had only graduated a few days ago, yet everyone was already discussing her future husband as if her life belonged to a preset schedule. Blair watched the garden below and quietly remarked that perhaps marriage itself could ultimately become Vanessa's path to freedom. Nowadays, it was hardly unusual for nobles to maintain mistresses outside of marriage. Rosalind immediately told him to stop talking nonsense. She treasured Vanessa too much to joke about her situation, and suggested he spend less time imagining scandals and more time remembering that his own engagement was entirely his own choice. Blair fell silent. Better than anyone, he understood exactly what she meant. His gaze drifted back toward Vanessa, who was walking alone through the gardens, and for some reason, that sight made him uneasy. A few days later, Theodore and River Ross were standing near the garden shed when another noble carriage arrived at the estate. River recognized the visitor immediately and remarked that today's candidate appeared to be Count Rowden. Clearly, the arrangement with Baron Howard had fallen through. Before Theodore could reply, Mary arrived carrying drinks and casually said that Baron Howard was actually a better choice. That single sentence alone was enough to make both men stare at her. River asked how anyone could reach that conclusion. Mary handed them the cups and explained that Count Rowden's reputation was truly terrifying. He had been married multiple times, but no one seemed entirely sure what had become of his previous wives. Rumors followed him everywhere. Some claimed he slept with every maid in his household. Others insisted he had recently fathered a child with a war widow. River nearly choked on his drink. He could not understand why any family would willingly arrange such a marriage. Mary lowered her voice and explained the ugly reality. Count Somerset's investments had failed time after time. The estate was struggling. The family's reputation was fading. At this point, the only valuable asset remaining was Vanessa herself. She glanced toward the mansion and quietly added that when the late Count and Countess were alive, no one could have imagined things becoming this desperate. Across the garden, Vanessa was already enduring the meeting. Count Rowden leaned back comfortably beside Count Somerset, while discussing her future as if she were not even sitting right there. He chuckled about how unbelievable it was that such a beautiful young lady had almost been married off to a man over 70. Count Somerset responded by saying they had almost missed out on a wonderful match. Rowden found this amusing. At one point, he casually patted Vanessa's thigh like someone inspecting furniture before buying it, and neither man seemed to notice how uncomfortable she had become. The conversation then shifted to rumors about her friendship with the Winchester heir. Count Somerset immediately dismissed any concerns, assuring Rowden that Vanessa merely knew the Winchester twins from childhood, and that he had personally managed every aspect of her private life. Satisfied, Rowden remarked that Autumn would provide ample time to prepare for the wedding. Both men laughed aloud and returned to discussing business. Vanessa slowly raised her eyes. Across the estate grounds, behind the flowers and hedges, she spotted Theodore standing near the garden shed. He was looking straight at her. His expression revealed absolutely nothing, yet somehow that made everything worse. For the first time all afternoon, she felt as though someone had actually noticed what had just happened. That evening, Theodore was walking through the gardens when he heard footsteps approaching from behind. Vanessa caught up and immediately announced that they needed to talk. Without slowing down, Theodore replied that he did not believe they had anything left to discuss. Vanessa refused to accept that answer. She called after him, rushed forward, and blocked his path. Theodore finally stopped. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Vanessa gathered all her courage and blurted out the last thing he expected to hear. "Do it again." Theodore blinked. "Do what again?" Vanessa's face turned beet red, but she forced herself to continue. "Kiss me." "This time I am certain I can do better." Theodore just stared at her. Of all the requests he anticipated today, a request for a second attempt was not on the list. Excuse me, was she really asking for a performance review on a kiss she had not even requested in the first place? The realization hit him a second later, and suddenly the conversation had become far more dangerous than either of them intended. Vanessa insisted she could do better this time, but Theodore hardly bothered with her words. He walked right past her and casually remarked that repeating the kiss would change nothing, because she did not even attract him in that way. The answer landed like a hammer blow. Panic immediately flickered across her face. She grabbed his sleeve before he could leave and blurted out that the wedding date had been set. By autumn, she would be officially married to Count Rowden. This was no longer a distant possibility. It was actually happening. Theodore turned back and told her that if she was truly this desperate, she should simply go find someone else instead of chasing him around the estate. Vanessa explained that she was rarely allowed outside the castle grounds. Even within the estate, she was constantly watched. Theodore suggested bringing someone in from the outside. She explained that anyone entering the property had to be approved by her uncle. He suggested running away entirely. That response finally softened her voice. Her parents were buried nearby, and she was the only one who still visited them. Theodore observed her for a moment before asking if she was truly going to sacrifice her own future for the sake of the deceased, letting herself become another piece of gossip consumed by high society. Trying a different approach, Vanessa asked if he really did not remember her. "We used to play together as children," she said, and Theodore paused. At this point, he knew he should probably reveal that he was not River Ross at all. The problem was that if he told her the truth, she would simply go hunt down the real River Ross and make the exact same offer. And from what he knew of River, there was a frightening possibility that he would agree out of pure empathy. Before Theodore could reach a decision, Vanessa continued explaining herself. She knew the proposal sounded insulting. The reason she approached him was because he was an outsider. He was not a noble. He had no title to lose. If a scandal broke out, the damage to his life would be minimal compared to hers. Theodore burst into laughter and asked if she would have approached him if he were a noble. Vanessa immediately shook her head. If a wealthy noble became involved, her uncle would simply force a marriage and turn the situation into another transaction. That was precisely what she wanted to avoid. Marriage held no meaning, unless it was with someone you truly loved. Furthermore, once summer ended, all attention would fall on her alone. He would leave. The scandal would be left behind. Gently taking his hand, she told him that summer was short. Before long, everything would fade. Theodore stood quietly weighing his options. He could accept her offer as the rustic gardener she believed he was playing. He could reveal his true identity and step in as a duke. Or he could walk away completely, and returned to enjoying the peaceful leave he had gone out of his way to find. The answer forming in his mind was embarrassingly simple. He was having fun. More importantly, this woman was the most interesting thing that had happened to him in a very long time. Before he could say anything, Vanessa suddenly stiffened and blurted out his name. Her voice trembled. Theodore asked what was wrong. She panic-strickenly pointed at herself and whispered that there was a spider. He told her to calm down and explain. A second later, she sank to her knees and announced she was certain the spider had crawled inside her dress. Theodore walked around behind her and took a look. After a few moments, he found the supposed spider culprit and flicked it away. Vanessa immediately twisted around and asked if he caught it. Theodore told her she had probably mistaken a loose strand of hair for a spider. Vanessa refused to believe him and insisted he check properly, as she was absolutely certain something had crawled into her clothes. Theodore asked if she was serious about wanting him to look closer. To his surprise, she nodded without hesitation. For a moment, he genuinely could not tell whether this was an elaborate flirting attempt or whether she was simply that naive. Either way, the situation had become dangerously awkward. Trying not to laugh, he leaned closer and continued checking, while Vanessa waited nervously for confirmation that the terrifying intruder was gone. The distance between them suddenly felt much smaller than before. The warm evening air grew strangely tense, and neither of them seemed entirely sure what to do with the silence that followed. What had started as another argument had somehow ended with the two of them standing much closer than intended, and for the first time all day, no one knew what to say next. Liam's hand still rested on Vanessa's back when she softly called his name. He told her he could not find any spider and asked if they should stop there. But Vanessa quietly shook her head. What had started as a search for an imaginary insect slowly morphed into something neither of them had expected. The distance between them vanished. A moment later, they were sharing another kiss, and the atmosphere became far more intimate than anyone's original plan. Vanessa realized she was struggling to reconcile the man standing before her with the childhood memories she carried. The River Ross she remembered was an energetic boy who chased her through the gardens and always fell behind whenever she ran too fast. This man felt entirely different, more confident, more enigmatic. And despite herself, she could not stop wondering which version was the real one. Finally, Theodore pulled back and studied her expression. He asked if she was absolutely certain she would not end up crying over him once summer came to an end. Vanessa remained silent for a moment. Theodore suggested making a bet on it, which finally elicited a reaction. She immediately replied that no one would ever fall for someone like him, which only made him smile. That answer told him far more than she intended. Even so, he grew serious enough to explain that he had no desire to complicate his life with responsibilities he was not ready for. Vanessa asked if he meant that literally, or if there was another reason behind that statement. Theodore merely told her she could satisfy that curiosity over time. If she truly intended to keep things simple and temporary, then perhaps they could enjoy this arrangement for what it truly was. As he gently lifted her face, he reminded her that even this carried risks. A noblewoman's reputation was fragile, and once damaged, it rarely recovered completely. Vanessa stood up and decided that if they were going to do this, she wanted one condition of her own. She extended her hand and told him that while this agreement lasted, they should treat it seriously. She did not want something shallow that vanished after a few meetings. If they were pretending to be together, she wanted it to feel genuine. Theodore looked at her outstretched hand and could not help finding the request strangely amusing. Of all the things she could have demanded, she chose sincerity. After a short pause, he accepted the handshake. That moment felt unexpectedly formal. Somehow, that simple gesture made the entire arrangement feel far more significant than the conversation that had birthed it. Afterward, Vanessa turned her face away, clearly flustered, and reminded him of the bet. She was completely confident. Even if the sky were to fall, she would never be the first to say she loved him. Theodore laughed and said he looked forward to seeing how long that confidence lasted, though he should probably mention that he did not believe in gods. Vanessa asked if they should continue where they had left off. As the summer evening settled around them, Theodore found himself reflecting on something she had said earlier. Vanessa had asserted that summer was short. In his experience, southern summers dragged on endlessly. The heat lingered, the days stretched without end, and every year the season brought forth blooms that only weeks before had seemed utterly ordinary. Looking at Vanessa's summer set, Theodore could not help thinking they probably should not have made that bet. Because whether either of them had realized it yet, summer had only just begun. Back at the garden shed, Theodore pushed the door open and told Vanessa to watch her head as she went inside. She stepped into the small room and curiously observed her surroundings in silence. This place was far simpler than anything she was accustomed to. Yet somehow it felt much more comfortable than many of the grand rooms inside the mansion. Theodore told her to rest if she felt tired and went outside to fetch water. Left alone, Vanessa sat on the edge of the bed and let out a long sigh. Everything that had happened in the garden kept replaying in her mind. And the more she thought about it, the less certain she became about what she was doing. Eventually, her attention shifted to a table covered in personal belongings. When Theodore returned carrying a bucket of water, he found her inspecting the items with clear curiosity. Vanessa pointed out that a few of them looked surprisingly expensive. She had seen similar luxury goods in the rooms of noble friends before. Was Navy pay truly that generous? Theodore replied that it was not exactly poor either. Vanessa immediately told him that he should probably spend less money on unnecessary luxuries. Theodore merely smiled and said he would manage his own finances. The conversation gradually settled into something more comfortable. Theodore helped her clean up, while Vanessa insisted she was entirely capable of handling it herself. He pointed out there was no mirror in the shed and asked if she was truly certain she could manage. That brought a confused look to her face. She asked if she really looked that disheveled. Theodore remarked that she looked exactly like someone who had spent the entire evening making questionable decisions in the garden. Vanessa immediately told him to slow down, as things had not progressed nearly as far as he was implying. Theodore gave her a puzzled look while she struggled to explain herself. By the time she realized what he was actually doing, the conversation had shifted in another direction. Her hair had been neatly braided without her even noticing. Vanessa raised her hand in surprise and stared at the result. It was beautiful. She asked where he had learned to do this. Theodore just looked at her, amused by the question, and said he might tell her the next time they met. Meanwhile, back inside the mansion, Mary had spent most of the afternoon searching for Vanessa. The moment she finally appeared, the maid immediately demanded an explanation. Vanessa apologized and said she had accidentally fallen asleep in the garden while reading a book. Mary clearly did not believe a word. As she helped fix Vanessa's appearance, she noticed the ribbon tied in her hair was stained with grass and mud. Without giving it much thought, she offered to throw it away. Vanessa's hand clutched the ribbon almost immediately. After a short silence, she told Mary not to throw it away. For some reason, she felt as though she might need it again. Mary gave her a suspicious look, but wisely decided not to ask any further questions. That night, the estate fell quiet. Inside the garden shed, Theodore sat alone on the edge of the bed. For a moment, he stared at a piece of clothing in his hand before tossing it aside and lying back to stare at the ceiling. Sleep refused to come. On the other side of the estate, Vanessa sat in her room, flipping the ribbon back and forth between her fingers. She told herself there was no reason to keep thinking about him. Yet her thoughts continued drifting toward the garden, the shed, and the strange agreement they had made. Neither of them was sleeping. Neither was ready to admit why. And the funniest part was that summer had only just begun. Rosaline Fabian Winchester sat in Vanessa's room, having completely abandoned the boat trip to the Dunstar River that she had spent most of last year talking about. When Vanessa pointed out that she should have gone, especially after being so excited about it, Rosaline fiercely clutched the newspaper in her hand and declared that there was no way she was leaving while Vanessa was ill. A moment later, her attention fell upon one of the headlines. "Goodness, the Duke of Battenberg is missing." That immediately drew everyone's attention. Rosaline began reading aloud and quickly offered her own theory. Since the Duke seemed to still be conducting business via letters and phone calls, she suspected he had simply vanished to avoid the royal family's marriage plans. In her opinion, whoever had managed to catch his attention enough to make him disappear must surely be someone extraordinary. Vanessa glanced at the photograph printed beside the article. The image was blurry and unclear, yet something about that face bothered her. It felt strangely familiar. Before she could think too deeply about it, Rosaline noticed her staring and immediately accused her of being interested in the Duke. Vanessa denied it so quickly that the answer sounded suspicious. Right then, Blair Fabian Winchester walked into the room and asked an obvious question. Interested in whom? The conversation then moved to the drawing room, where the newspaper became the center of attention. Rosaline insisted that the Duke possessed precisely the kind of face capable of making a person plan an entire future after a single glance. Vanessa pointed out that the picture was too blurry for her to even discern what he looked like. Blair folded his book closed long enough to offer a completely different opinion. From everything he had heard, the Duke's private life was a disaster. Women were reportedly showing up at the Battenberg estate constantly, claiming to be pregnant with his child. Stranger still, no official portrait of him had been released since he was 10 years old. Blair considered that a massive red flag. Men did not hide themselves to that extent without a reason. Rosaline immediately accused him of putting down someone more attractive than himself. Blair asked if insulting her own twin brother was truly necessary. Vanessa finally told both of them to stop bickering. Blair conceded, but left her with one final observation. Men never did anything without a reason. Vanessa casually agreed while Rosaline waved the newspaper around, insisting that being curious was entirely normal. More importantly, Vanessa needed to recover quickly because an upcoming picnic was approaching that they absolutely could not miss. A few days later, the missing Duke of Battenberg was sitting inside a garden shed with a telephone pressed to his ear. On the other end of the line, Norman was providing the usual reports. The annual charitable donation had been successfully delivered. The shipping company was operating smoothly. Edgar would soon head south with several important documents. Theodore listened quietly and confirmed that everything was in order. Norman carefully asked if there was any chance he intended to return earlier than expected. Theodore reminded him that he had made his intentions very clear. He was spending his leave here. Norman immediately agreed, but could not help mentioning that the Dowager Duchess was handling the situation very poorly. She had virtually given up social activities and spent most of her day pacing between her room and the garden while complaining about her missing grandson. Theodore told him to reassure his grandmother that he would return when he wished, and that she could tone down her dramatic protests. Naturally, that only encouraged Norman to ask the question everyone wanted answered. Had he finally met a woman worth marrying? Theodore dryly asked if the latest rumor was still that he had eloped. Norman replied that he would simply need advance notice if wedding preparations suddenly became necessary. As the conversation neared its end, Theodore glanced through the shed window and noticed something interesting. Vanessa Somerset, who was supposedly too sick to leave her room, was walking across the estate grounds, looking perfectly healthy. More importantly, she was not alone. Blair was walking beside her, and both seemed deeply immersed in conversation. Theodore watched them for a few seconds. The amusement in his expression gradually faded into something more focused, something sharper. When he spoke again, his tone had completely changed. Before hanging up, he assigned Norman a new task. He wanted to know Vanessa Somerset's debts, her reputation at school, the names of her friends, her history with men. Every detail, leaving nothing out. Inside the cozy Greenery Cafe, Vanessa sat opposite Rosaline and Blair with a contract in her hands. The moment Rosaline saw the papers, she nearly leaped out of her chair and demanded to know if Vanessa was signing a contract for another novel. When Vanessa confirmed it, Rosaline's eyes lit up instantly. The contract even included a secret promotional campaign. If all went well, Vanessa could become famous much sooner than expected. Vanessa smiled softly and admitted that none of this would have been possible without their help. Had she attempted to pursue this path alone, her uncle would never have approved it. The sincerity in her voice almost brought Rosaline to tears. Blair quietly turned his face away while Rosaline vehemently declared herself overwhelmed with emotion. Trying to lighten the mood, Vanessa offered to treat them both to dinner that evening. Rosaline looked just moments away from crying for real. Unfortunately, Blair chose that exact moment to say something that completely shifted the atmosphere. He pointed out that Vanessa did not need to exhaust herself trying to save every single penny. Once she married, her husband's wealth would become hers as well. She would receive an allowance. Financial security would no longer be a concern. Rosaline immediately turned to him. She reminded him that he had promised to help prevent the marriage at all costs and demanded to know if he had changed his mind. Blair calmly insisted he was merely being realistic. As someone close to both Vanessa and her family, he felt obligated to acknowledge reality instead of pretending it did not exist. Rosaline argued that he was treating this marriage as though it were already an inevitability. Perhaps Vanessa simply wanted to experience a normal working life for herself. Perhaps she deserved encouragement rather than another lecture on marriage. The argument gradually faded, but the tension remained. Everyone at the table understood what was really happening. Vanessa was not writing novels because she wanted a hobby. She was desperately seeking a way to support herself without becoming someone else's bargaining chip. Blair knew that better than anyone, which was precisely why his words stung so deeply. Her uncle did not care about her happiness. He cared about the money her marriage would bring him. If she wanted freedom, she had to address the problem at its root. Blair studied her carefully before asking if she really intended to avoid marriage forever. Life was difficult for women without strong backing. Her uncle would not give up easily. Then, lowering his voice, he asked if there might already be someone in her heart. Vanessa immediately denied it. The issue was not another man. The issue was that this was not the future her parents had wanted for her, nor was it the future she wanted. Rosaline fell silent. Blair did the same. After a long pause, Blair carefully suggested that perhaps she should not reject marriage entirely. Whether she married or simply chose a partner outside of marriage, perhaps she should consider building a family before stepping away. Once she experienced that happiness, she might discover that marriage itself was not the enemy. There might be another path forward that she had not yet considered. No one knew how to respond to that. The conversation slowed to broken rhythms. For the first time all afternoon, the three friends felt separated by something larger than a disagreement. They all cared for one another, yet none of them could fully reach the others. By the time they left the cafe, Vanessa was carrying a disappointment she had never expected to feel. She knew convincing people would be difficult. What hurt was realizing that even those closest to her did not fully understand why she was fighting so hard. As she walked back through the gardens later that day, the conversation kept replaying in her mind. A part of her had hoped Blair and Rosaline would instantly understand, since they had shared so much together over the years. Instead, she felt lonelier than she had before entering the cafe. Then she saw someone up ahead. Theodore was standing in the afternoon sun with a dog sitting beside him. The animal looked alert, while Theodore appeared completely relaxed. He glanced over, noticed her approaching, and their eyes met. Vanessa walked toward him and greeted him with a casual, "Long time no see, River." Theodore ordered the dog to stay before looking back at her. "Yeah, long time no see, Vanessa." The exchange was completely ordinary. No discussions about marriage, no negotiations, no lectures about her future. Just a simple greeting. And after everything that had happened today, that small bit of normalcy felt far more comforting than she had expected. For the first time since leaving Greenery, Vanessa found herself smiling without forcing it, and Theodore noticed immediately. Neither of them said anything about it. They simply continued walking together under the fading summer light. Back inside the garden shed, Theodore poured tea for Vanessa and told her he had thought she had gotten scared and run off. She asked if he had actually been waiting for her. He looked at her quietly and said he had heard she was sick. And Vanessa froze for a moment before telling him she had used that time to think about what she needed to do from here. Specifically, the plan to ruin her reputation, now that having a child had been taken off the table. Theodore sat on the edge of the bed and pointed out that even in the conservative South, a rumor about a woman being alone with a man in a garden at night was enough to cause serious damage. Vanessa said such matters would not be printed in the newspapers. Theodore repeated the phrase "printed in the newspapers" as if turning the words over in his mind. And Vanessa fell silent before laying out her options one by one. Calling journalists, pretending to have a breakdown, calling a doctor, acting mentally unstable. Theodore told her it was better not to start a performance she could not maintain to the end. She asked if she should pretend to be a woman ready to throw herself into any man's arms. He looked at her and said she was currently doing that right now. Vanessa said, "Ah," and took a long sip of tea. Theodore stood up and told her that an uncertain plan would only ruin her life. Vanessa said, "Anyway, today I really just came to see your face, and to let you know I was feeling better." As she reached into her purse, he flicked her hair, and he told her she sounded like a merchant trying to prove her reliability to a client. She told him that if he was busy, he should go do his work, because she also had work to complete today. As he continued flicking her hair, she pulled out her manuscript and began writing, and he looked at it and asked if it was a novel. She said yes, because besides her allowance, she needed to save money, and the novel could prove useful. Memories of what Blair and Rosaline had said flooded back as she wrote, that there was no need to go to such lengths because the allowance would come once she married, and she was not doing this for a living. She sat quietly with that for a moment before looking at Theodore and asking if he also thought that kind of work was unnecessary for a noblewoman. He looked her in the face and said absolutely not. That doing this was far better than doing nothing at all. She asked if he believed in the value of honest labor. He said he believed in the value of money. She said, all right. And something about the straightforwardness of that answer made her smile to herself. Theodore stepped back and observed her for a moment before calling her name, leaning in close and kissing her. Afterward, he pulled back the bed and Vanessa said, "Wait, River, hold on." He asked if he should stop. Her heart pounded as if she had just run a long distance from mere physical contact, and a feeling almost like fear coursed through her. She thought about what he had asked earlier, whether she was certain she would not come looking for him in tears when summer ended. She looked at his face and decided that by this point there was no turning back. Theodore leaned in once more, and they kissed. And the shed was exceedingly quiet around them, while the summer outside was at its hottest peak. Back on the bed, Theodore held Vanessa, and something inside him was genuinely unsettled by what he could not explain. Everyone else who had pursued him came with clear desires and predictable motives, and none of it had ever swayed him. She was different, and not in any way he could clearly point out, which was the part that bothered him most. He thought that perhaps from the moment he saw her sitting beneath that tree, he should have recognized what was coming. What surprised him was realizing that he completely welcomed it. A carriage ride later, he was sitting opposite his cousin, a man named Edgar Powell Marlborough, who was looking around the countryside with obvious disgust, asking if Theodore was truly comfortable staying in such a shabby, tiny, and filthy place. Theodore said everything was fine. Edgar could not understand why anyone would reject a proposal from the princess just to vanish into a backwater area like this. And the only plausible explanation to him was some illegitimate child, which would at least justify their grandmother's relentless fury. Theodore bluntly told him that marrying the princess would only turn him into a decorative son-in-law in the royal family. And when Edgar continued pressing, Theodore told him to head back if he was only going to spew nonsense. Edgar fell silent and observed him for a moment, before saying the air around him felt different compared to the last time they met, and he could not quite figure out what had changed. Then something outside the carriage window caught Liam's gaze, and his expression shifted before he could hide it, and he shook his head and pressed his hand to his forehead as if resetting himself. Edgar immediately noticed and asked if he wanted to meet her. Theodore said, "What?" Edgar told him that the woman holding the umbrella was Haley Morton of Marquis Morton's family, and that connection would benefit his business, and that with looks like hers, his grandmother would be very pleased with a marriage. Theodore looked at Edgar's unhidden smile and thought he should at least try to hide his expression when making these suggestions. Then Theodore said her neck was very beautiful. It sounded so dull that the carriage driver's announcement of their arrival was the only thing saving the moment from complete silence. Edgar stared at him and said, "What on earth?" before telling Theodore she would probably be very happy to hear that. And then he stepped outside. Theodore watched through the window as Edgar walked over and took the umbrella from Haley. As her face turned slightly toward the carriage, he looked at her and thought they looked completely different. That thought pulled him straight back to last night, to Vanessa, and the smallness of the storage shed, and the way he had been entirely drawn into her like someone who had lost all reason. He let out a quiet sigh to himself. Then Haley's gaze drifted toward the carriage and caught him looking. And for a moment, neither of them moved, and Theodore sat there thinking of someone else entirely. Vanessa sat at her desk with the novel open before her, but she was not writing. She was back in the garden shed in her mind, and the memory pulling her there was a quiet one. Theodore was sitting on the edge of the bed, telling her to get up and eat something because she must be exhausted after all those hours of shouting. And she told him to stop teasing her, but still ate every bite. Afterwards, while she was packing her things before dawn, he asked if she was leaving, and she told him Mary would come looking once the sun rose and that she would return the following night. He told her not tomorrow. She looked at him in surprise, and he said he would be away for a few days. And before she could say anything, he pulled her into an embrace. And she stood there completely flustered, asking what he was doing. And he told her that if she waited patiently, he would bring her back a gift. Back in the present, she buried her face on the desk and said aloud to herself that they were acting very much like lovers, and it had been a full week since she last saw him. Then she told herself to calm down. Mary walked in and asked what she was doing. Vanessa sat up straight and said nothing, but Mary's expression made it clear she had something to tell her. Whatever Mary intended to say no longer mattered for long. because Vanessa found herself sitting in the main drawing room opposite Count Roden, who was cheerfully commenting that it had been a while and that his fiancée looked rather unhappy to see him. Vanessa told him she was simply surprised because she had received no notice of his visit, and her uncle was away. He told her he already knew that and did not mind, since she was the only one he had come to see anyway. He said he had intended to take things slowly, but there seemed to be no time for that with his schedule. And before Vanessa could ask what he meant, the door opened and Count Somerset entered alongside an elderly woman introduced as Mrs. Luther, a renowned expert in her field. Vanessa repeated the words, "Her field?" as a question. Count Roden looked at her with slight surprise and asked if Somerset had not told her, since he assumed she had already been informed. Vanessa said her uncle had never mentioned a thing. Count Roden smoothly explained that for people of their status, this was standard premarital procedure, a matter of marital fidelity and unborn heirs. He added that if something you paid a high price for turned out to be defective, anyone would be disappointed, wouldn't they? Vanessa looked at him for a long moment and quietly asked if he was saying he wanted proof of her virginity. He told her he was glad they understood each other, admitting he was slightly concerned about her boarding school past, given how many young ladies lived far too freely nowadays. Right? Vanessa stood up and told him that if he doubted her, he need only cancel the engagement, and that she would report everything that happened today to her uncle. Before she could take another step, Count Roden grabbed her arm and she rasped out, asking what he was doing. And then Count Roden looked at her and told her to shut her mouth, sit down, and spread her legs. The room fell completely silent. Vanessa stared at him as though she were seeing him clearly for the very first time. And what she saw would not easily be erased from her mind. Count Roden sat near Vanessa and told her not to cry, calling her a child and asking what he could do to soothe her heart, while she had to use all her strength not to say exactly what she was thinking. Mrs. Luther stepped forward and explained her method with the calm authority of someone who had done this many times, saying that a single drop of holy water on the skin would reveal everything, that if the young lady was still a virgin, the water would remain still, and if her body was no longer pure, it would simply run off. Count Roden listened and nodded approvingly, saying he now understood why so many noble ladies recommended her. And Mrs. Luther asked if they could proceed calmly before turning to the Count and asking him to step outside for a moment. Once he had left, Mrs. Luther sat near Vanessa and told her to bring her arm closer. Vanessa looked at her and quietly said she found this method rather suspicious, as she could not see how plain water could prove anything about a person's purity. Mrs. Luther told her it was a matter of conscience. If she had nothing to hide, she would not be trembling. She asked if there was anything in her heart making her tremble. Vanessa sat quietly and weighed that. And then she told the older woman that Count Roden stepping aside without complaint meant he fully trusted her word, which meant that whether the water spilled or not, she could say whatever she wanted in the end. Mrs. Luther said yes. Vanessa interrupted her and said she wanted to bribe her verdict. Outside the mansion, rain fell steadily, and Vanessa stood on the staircase, letting the rain pour over her, thinking that if this had happened before she lost her virginity, she might have welcomed it, as this might have been the exact scandal she always wanted, the very thing she had once hoped for. And yet, now the thing she had once wished for was what she was desperately trying to hide. Then an umbrella appeared overhead, and Liam, standing beside her, asked what was wrong. Vanessa looked at him with tears mingling with rain on her face, and thought she still did not want the summer to end, and she embraced him before she could stop herself. He did not say a word. He simply stood there in the rain and let her hold him. Afterwards, in the garden shed, they lay on the bed, and Theodore told her he thought she was letting her throat rest, so why was she holding back so much? Vanessa asked, "Well, what if we get caught?" Theodore said, "Isn't that what you wanted?" She told him that if they were caught now, it would put him in danger. And she sat up and said that if their relationship was discovered, it must be after she had left this place. He told her that even so, if her body hurt, she should let herself make noise. Vanessa thought to herself that it felt again as if they were truly together, like two people in a real relationship rather than a summer arrangement with an expiration date written from the start. And beneath that thought was the memory of Mrs. Luther's instructions that she would not change her verdict for money right now, but to contact her again once a child was on the way. She had one more thing to add, that a relationship like this could not be kept forever, and that nurturing something that was not genuine would only leave the young lady as the one bearing the hurt in the end. Intertwined with that memory was Liam's voice telling her she needed to take better care of her body, and her own voice promising that she would. Both memories ran side by side in a way that became harder to untangle with each passing summer day. Back in the garden shed, Theodore asked Vanessa if she needed to head back, reminding her that she always left early because her maid would come looking. Vanessa did not look up from her book as she told him there was a circus in Bath today and everyone had gone out to see it, so this time she could take her time. Theodore asked if she wanted to go see it. She finally looked up and asked why he brought that up. And he told her she looked as if she really wanted to go. She said it would be a disaster if she bumped into someone she knew, because her uncle would never let it slide. Theodore looked at her quietly before reaching out and placing a hat on her head. The answer was simple, he told her. She just had to make sure she did not get caught. The circus grounds were bustling with people laughing and moving in every direction. And Vanessa walked beside Liam, tugging at her clothes, saying she felt awkward as if everyone was looking at her strangely. He pointed out that for someone feeling that way, she had done quite a lot of shopping. She held up a large bag and explained that a friend's birthday was coming up, and since she rarely got out without friends, she wanted to buy gifts while she had the chance. A brooch for Rosaline and cufflinks for Blair. And she asked if he thought they would like them. Before Theodore could reply, fireworks exploded in the sky, and Vanessa's face immediately turned upward. She said, "Wow," and then, "So beautiful." And then she turned to Liam, telling him that the butterfly-shaped one had just exploded, asking if he saw it. He said, "Yes, I saw it." She called him a liar immediately, saying he had been staring at her face the entire time before telling him to come along, because the circus was about to start, and she walked ahead while he watched her walk away. Theodore thought that this summer was a fleeting dream that would never return, that from the very beginning, their relationship had been trapped in lies, and even if they met again somewhere in the future, the thought remained unfinished, because a voice cut across the crowd, calling out loudly, "Captain!" A young Navy officer bowed before him, saying it was an honor, stating he had heard the captain was spending his leave in the South and could not believe he ran into him like this. His name was Enon Campbell from the 4th Battalion, and he told Theodore to speak comfortably. Theodore sighed and told him he was Petty Officer Ross. Campbell said, "Huh?" Theodore said it seemed he had mistaken him for someone else, and Campbell began to say something when Vanessa walked over, calling out, "River." Theodore looked at her. She looked at him and then looked at Campbell. The three of them stood there amidst the circus crowd, and the summer evening suddenly felt far more complicated than it had 5 minutes ago. Because a single wrong word from Campbell was all it would take to shatter everything Theodore had carefully built since the moment he climbed down from that fruit tree and decided to stay. Vanessa looked at Theodore and began calling his name. But before she could utter more than a single word, panic overtook her. Her bag was gone. Whatever they had intended to discuss immediately became unimportant. She explained that it had vanished while she was browsing a stall near an alley. And within minutes, the two of them found themselves sitting in a police station to file a report. The officer listened carefully before nodding. Apparently, this type of theft had become increasingly common. He began filling out papers and asked for her name. Vanessa immediately froze. If she gave her real name, the final report would end up with her uncle. That meant questions, restrictions, and another suffocating round of surveillance. The silence stretched long enough for the officer to notice something was off. Before Vanessa could invent an answer, Theodore stepped up smoothly, placed a business card on the desk, and introduced himself instead. He told the officer his name was Theo and that he was her companion. Any updates could be sent directly to him. The officer took the information and promised to be in touch if anything was recovered. Once they left the station, Vanessa looked at him suspiciously and pointed out that Theo was very close to Theodore. She wanted to know exactly when he had decided that would be his alias. Theodore merely smiled as if the answer were self-evident. The moment they stepped onto a quieter street, Theodore unexpectedly grabbed her hand. Before Vanessa could ask what he was doing, he pulled her into a narrow alley and gently pressed her against the wall. Then he kissed her. The suddenness of it stole every thought from her head. For a brief moment, the noise of the city completely vanished. Theodore realized he was holding her tighter than intended, wanting to feel her close enough that even their heartbeats seemed connected. That sensation caught him off guard. Vanessa finally pulled back, flustered and out of breath, and immediately told him, "Not here." More importantly, Theodore needed to wait. Her use of that name made Theodore pause. He pressed his hand to his forehead and let out a long sigh before leaning in and placing a kiss on her forehead instead. Afterwards, he asked what scandalous things she had imagined he was going to do. The question only made Vanessa even more embarrassed. A short while later, the two ended up standing on a bridge overlooking the water. City lights shimmered on the river surface as night fell around them. Vanessa remarked that they hadn't even gotten into the circus. If she had known tickets would sell out so fast, they should have arrived much earlier. Theodore pointed out that a little extra money at the entrance probably would have solved the problem. Vanessa immediately objected. That kind of thinking was precisely how people went broke. She had seen enough evidence of his questionable spending habits scattered around his room. Those luxury items alone were probably enough to feed an entire family. Theodore raised an eyebrow while Vanessa confidently explained that normal people didn't build fortunes by throwing money out the window. Even Mary said so. Liam's expression grew increasingly amused the longer she spoke. "Is that so?" he asked. Vanessa firmly insisted it was. Then she leaned forward against the railing and gazed out over the river. The fresh air felt wonderful. She admitted she was tired of everything waiting for her inside the castle walls. Recently, she constantly found herself wanting to run away. Anywhere would do. Theodore turned and backed against the railing while observing her. For a moment, an old memory washed over him. A familiar voice saying she couldn't stand a certain place any longer. A promise that once everything was resolved, she would return. A promise directed at Theodore. The memory faded as quickly as it had appeared, leaving behind only the familiar realization that people often said things they never intended to keep. Theodore looked at Vanessa and wondered if she would ultimately become another person who vanished as soon as circumstances changed. Then he spoke up. "So?" Vanessa blinked in confusion and asked what he meant. Theodore casually asked if she wanted to run away together. "Just take each other's hand and leave." The question sounded light, almost playful. Yet the moment it left his mouth, the space between them grew strangely quiet, because despite the playful tone, both understood the truth. Neither of them was free, not truly free, and perhaps that was precisely why the idea felt so tempting. Leaning back against the bridge railing, Theodore casually asked if they should simply hold hands and run away together. Vanessa immediately turned the question back on him. Was he the one who wanted to run away? Theodore pointed out that she was the one talking about fleeing a few minutes ago. Even so, Vanessa shook her head. Running away sounded romantic until everyone started paying the price for it. If she vanished, her friends would be questioned first. Her maids would struggle to find employment because families didn't trust servants involved in scandals. Wanted posters with her face would appear all across Ingram. Anyone kind enough to help her would eventually be dragged into this mess too. The more she thought about it, the more she realized running away was impossible. Fortunately, she had another plan. Theodore already disliked the look on her face. Vanessa explained that she planned to start spreading rumors involving a few other men. That way, no one would focus on him. Men love to boast about their relationships with attractive women, and if she kept silent, they would spread the stories themselves. Eventually, people would assume she had countless suitors and stop paying attention to any single person. Theodore stared at her for a few seconds. Then he asked if her brilliant strategy was truly to throw herself into the arms of as many men as possible. The words came out sharper than he intended. Vanessa simply nodded. Somehow she managed to be extremely cautious and incredibly reckless at the same time, and that contradiction annoyed him far more than usual. The tension melted away when Vanessa unexpectedly smiled and told him she had truly enjoyed today. It had been a long time since she felt this relaxed. She thanked him for the memory and admitted she would probably remember today for the rest of her life. Theodore immediately called her a liar. Vanessa blinked in confusion. The young man backed against the railing and told her that in a few years, she wouldn't even remember his face. People always forgot. Vanessa argued that she wouldn't. Theodore reminded her that she had already forgotten what River Ross looked like when they were kids. Without hesitation, Vanessa insisted she remembered clearly. Curious, Theodore asked for details. She confidently answered that he had black hair and blue eyes. For a moment, Theodore just stared at her. The answer was completely wrong. So wrong that he almost laughed. At the same time, something about that answer hurt more than he expected. He pressed his hand to his forehead and told her that was another lie. Vanessa immediately objected. How could it be a lie when she was looking straight into his eyes right now? The question hung between them. Neither uttered another word, because for one brief second, the conversation drifted dangerously close to a truth neither of them was ready to touch. Late that evening, Vanessa returned to the mansion and pushed open her bedroom door. The moment she stepped inside, she nearly jumped. Blair was sitting in the dark waiting for her. Vanessa immediately demanded to know what he was doing there, how long he had been sitting in her room, and asked why Rosaline had insisted she stay out all day if this was the plan. Blair calmly explained that she had been ill for days. Her fever wouldn't break, and Rosaline had been genuinely worried about her. Vanessa quickly claimed she felt much better now and started asking how he got into her room. Blair interrupted her before she could change the subject. He slowly looked her up and down and asked where exactly she had been. Vanessa replied that inside the mansion felt suffocating, so she went out for a walk. Blair was not convinced. The moment she tried to step past him, he reached out and grabbed her arm. Vanessa froze. Blair quietly pointed out that she could never look him straight in the eye when she was lying. She knew that. Vanessa asked what he thought he was doing. Blair held her gaze and finally asked the question he had been building all evening. Had she gotten herself a boyfriend while he wasn't paying attention? Specifically, a Navy man. The room fell silent. Vanessa said nothing. She just looked at him while her heart beat louder with every passing second. He told her he had seen her meeting a Navy officer. Vanessa immediately explained that River was simply an old childhood friend. They happened to meet again after years apart and were glad to catch up. Blair didn't look convinced for a second. Instead, he pointed to the faint marks on her neck and quietly asked if friends usually left such evidence behind. Vanessa's face burned with embarrassment. She told him to stop. Blair kept pressing, asking if she realized she was being manipulated and whether her uncle knew about this mysterious officer. That was the moment Vanessa finally lost her patience. She yanked her arm back and told him to try laying a finger on Theodore if he thought he could. Then she demanded to know what right he had to treat her like this. Blair was clearly stunned by that reaction. Vanessa took a shaky breath and told him he should stop crossing boundaries, especially for the sake of his fiancée. The reminder shifted his expression instantly. After a long silence, Blair quietly revealed something she had never known. His mother believed Vanessa had lost her virginity to her uncle. Those words struck like a physical blow, and Vanessa was completely stunned. Blair continued speaking. When Rosaline heard that accusation, she flew into a rage. The argument became so severe that she was grounded for most of the vacation. Suddenly, Vanessa recalled Rosaline abandoning the boat trip she had eagerly anticipated for a whole year. Blair explained that his mother blamed Rosaline's behavior on Vanessa's influence, and even planned to write to the headmaster asking for her expulsion. The situation only ended because Blair agreed to accept his engagement. That was the condition. That was the price paid. He told Vanessa she knew nothing about any of this. Before she could answer, he turned and walked out, leaving her standing alone in silence. Her gaze finally drifted toward the hat lying on the floor. For the first time that evening, she began to understand how much the people around her had been carrying without her knowledge. Late that evening, Blair found his way to the garden shed. The moment he walked in, he observed the small space and remarked that it was almost unbelievable. The Duke of Battenberg, the man the royal family was desperately searching for, was hiding in a shed that most nobles wouldn't even use for storage. Vanessa, he presumed, still believed Theodore was nothing more than an ordinary naval officer. Theodore continued trimming a tree with his shears and casually agreed that the misunderstanding was regrettable. Blair's patience began to run out. He pointed out that delaying a royal marriage proposal in such a public manner had turned the king into a laughingstock, both at home and abroad. Theodore listened quietly before asking why Blair seemed so overly concerned with the dignity of the royal family. If he cared so much, perhaps he should nominate himself as the groom instead. Blair's fists clenched. He told Theodore to settle whatever business remained unfinished and leave within a few days. The only reason he had kept silent until now was because of Vanessa's reputation. Theodore found that response laughable. In Vanessa's own words, destroying her reputation seemed to be her entire goal. Wasn't that what Blair wanted as well? Blair immediately denied it, but Theodore did not stop there. He calmly brought up the lingering looks, the careful observations, and all the signs Blair probably assumed no one noticed. In Liam's mind, the situation became painfully simple. When Blair believed he was dealing with an ordinary officer, perhaps he imagined that a scandal would make Vanessa more accessible. Perhaps if her social standing collapsed, she would finally have nowhere else to turn. Theodore looked straight at him and remarked that the unfortunate part was that the hand Blair reached out with such naive intentions had accidentally touched a member of the Battenberg family. Blair called the accusation slander. Theodore asked if they were finished because, unlike some people, he was extremely busy. The conversation should have ended there, but instead Blair took a step forward and demanded he stop before Vanessa was hurt any further. Then, to Liam's surprise, he dropped to one knee. The gesture was sincere, even desperate. Blair admitted that Vanessa was more precious to him than anything else. For a moment, the shed fell silent. Then Theodore asked a simple question. What exactly could Blair offer her? A future spent hiding his feelings from his mother? A life of compromises and excuses? Blair slowly looked up, shock spreading across his face. Theodore asked if he was wrong. And judging by the silence that followed, neither of them liked the answer. Rosaline, lying on Vanessa's bed, declared that Blair was completely unpredictable because he had canceled the Grand Tour trip. She couldn't believe she shared the same mother with someone like that. She mentioned that she and Blair would soon return to London and stay at a hotel in Bath until then. And Vanessa, who was changing clothes, told her they were more than welcome to keep staying at the mansion if a hotel would be uncomfortable. But Rosaline sighed and said if she stayed any longer, her mother would fly into a rage and drag her home. Then she apologized. And Vanessa told her not to because it was the truth. That despite everything, that woman had taken very good care of her when she was young. And even though they grew distant after her parents passed away, she was still someone she was grateful to. The words lingered for a moment before Vanessa recalled what Blair had told her. That his mother firmly believed Vanessa had lost her virginity to her uncle. That she blamed Rosaline's behavior on Vanessa's influence, and had even tried writing to the headmaster requesting her expulsion. Rosaline said at least she would remain quiet for a while, because Blair's wedding had been moved forward. And Vanessa asked what she meant. Rosaline explained that since the trip was off, he was dragged straight to the altar, even though he clearly enjoyed staying in this area, and was even looking for houses nearby. And she wondered aloud how much of a nuisance he planned to be to his bride-to-be by settling down in a place so far away. Then Mary appeared and informed Vanessa that she was ready. Rosaline told her to hurry up and step outside. Vanessa looked at her reflection and asked if it looked strange. Rosaline stared at her and said, "My lord, you are so beautiful." So much so that it made her want to go find that old count right now. And Vanessa took her hand and gently called her name. Rosaline told her that the bride's best friend was supposed to be the first to see the wedding veil, as people said it brought a happy marriage. And even though she absolutely hated the man Vanessa was being married off to, this was a once-in-a-lifetime moment. And she was so glad she got to see it with her own eyes. Vanessa quietly thanked her. And neither of them noticed Blair standing at the cracked door, looking at both of them. Meanwhile, at the Winchester home, a conversation was taking place carrying an entirely different weight, because Henry Winchester sat with his wife, Louise, and said he heard Blair plan to spend his honeymoon in the South even after the wedding. Louise said that was precisely why she had told him they should never let the children spend time in Somerset. Henry replied that he didn't mind the children being around Vanessa, and Louise said she hated seeing them drawn toward her time after time. Henry held her face in his hands and said honestly that every time this happened, they became this desperate. Then he asked her a quiet question of immense weight. Did she believe that people of the same blood could instinctively recognize each other, and whether their children might one day recognize their true father? The story then flashed back to a past moment where Louise was kneeling on the floor and Henry stood above her, asking who else knew she was pregnant. And she told him, no one, just him and that man. Henry sighed and told her to think carefully, because if there was a child in her womb, that child was already his, and their wedding would proceed as scheduled, and all she needed to do was stay by his side and give birth. He took her hand and told her that was the only punishment he would give her, and that man. Back in Vanessa's room, Blair quietly pushed the door open and stepped inside. Both Rosaline and Vanessa looked up in surprise. Blair's gaze found Vanessa and stopped there. And the room contained something unsaid that no one inside was quite ready to speak aloud right now. In his office, Theodore sat at his desk, his mind drifting toward Vanessa, as if she were standing over him with a piece of paper, telling him to sign. And he thought she had completely lost her mind, which was also when he realized someone was sitting opposite him without permission. He told her he didn't recall giving her permission to sit. The woman smiled and asked if she could sit before extending her hand and introducing herself as Haley G. Morton. Theodore asked how she knew where to find him. Was it his cousin or his grandmother? Haley told him she was afraid she couldn't answer that, because she didn't want to upset him with the truth and didn't want to lie for the sake of trust between them. And Theodore told her that was ridiculous after having only met once or twice. Haley told him she heard a rumor down south that he had a woman he was seriously seeing, and if that happened to be true, he would need her sooner or later, just as she needed him. The way she said it was calm enough to suggest she had thought this through far more than he had. Back in the garden shed, Theodore and Vanessa were in the bathtub, and she was telling him she really didn't need help and could wash herself just fine. Theodore told her she was exhausted, and it had been a while, making Vanessa's face flush red as she told him it was because he kept pushing her. Then she said that, more importantly, she had finished trying on her wedding dress while he was away, and when summer passed, the wedding would actually happen, and it was really not far off. The way she said it carried something heavier than the words themselves, as if she were reminding herself as much as she was telling him. Earlier, Theodore had been on a call with his grandmother, who told him that if he said the Morton girl was acceptable, she would completely cancel the royal marriage negotiations. Theodore told her he knew it, that she was the one who sent Haley, and unfortunately, she was not acceptable, nor did he intend to accept a royal marriage. His grandmother asked if he intended to cut off the Battenberg bloodline, pointing out that the Morton family was one of the founding families of Ingram with an outstanding reputation, and if he would rather die than marry into the royal family, then Morton was his best option and a way to prove his loyalty. Theodore tried to stop her. "Theodore," she said. She then told him they had both witnessed the aftermath of his parents' foolish love. His grandmother would not blame him for whatever he was doing on vacation, but demanded he meet Haley just 3 times before she respected his decision. It truly broke her heart, she said. She had always told him never to abandon the family for a trivial thing like love. Theodore laced his hands together and thought to himself, what love? Because after all, this was a relationship built on lies and deception from the start. And now he clung to that thought as if it meant something. Back in that bathtub, Vanessa was quietly dismantling everything he had just told himself, because she was watching his eyes when he didn't think she was paying attention. And she thought River Ross sometimes looked at her as if this summer would never end, as if what they had was something that would endure beyond it. She didn't know what to do with that look. Truthfully, neither did he. The fact that he wouldn't admit it was starting to become the most obvious thing in the room. In the garden shed, Theodore was writing when Vanessa told him she would be leaving the estate for about a week starting tomorrow. He looked up and asked why. She explained she was going on a hunting trip with Count Rowden, hosted by the Essex family, and that she had repeatedly refused it. But they told her she should get some experience before the wedding because he seemed to really enjoy hunting. Theodore asked if she had ever been hunting before. She said she didn't even know how to hold a gun. They quietly looked at each other for a moment before he stood up, held out his hand, and told her to take it. He picked up an umbrella and used it like a makeshift rifle, telling her to press it firmer against her shoulder. She asked if this was right, and he told her that at that angle she would dislocate her shoulder. He continued guiding her, telling her a real gun would be heavier than this and that she needed to spread her feet and keep her back straight. Vanessa blushed when he asked if slightly higher felt better. And he told her the servants would handle the reloading, so she only needed to focus on holding it correctly. She knew he was truly a Navy officer because he explained everything so clearly. And he quietly told her that humans used guns instead of claws or gauntlets. That it was a fair kind of power because it allowed even the weakest person to kill someone. That when she got used to it, she might mistake a person for an animal and pull the trigger. Then he said bang, and Vanessa flinched so hard she dropped the umbrella. In that moment, she realized that if River Ross had truly fallen in love with her, she needed to push him away even further. Afterwards, she kissed him, and the thought continued drifting beneath it that she couldn't leave a stain like herself on the bright future of a soldier. If this truly was love, then she wanted to cherish it by not becoming his weakness. That was the most selfless and heartbreaking conclusion she could reach. And she arrived at that conclusion while kissing him. The next morning, Vanessa and Mary were in an automobile moving through the streets. Mary looked at her and said she didn't look well at all. Vanessa said she thought she was just a little carsick. Mary complained about the outdated car and asked why, with so many vehicles to choose from, the master had lent them this antique. And Vanessa told her it was still one of her uncle's favorites, and that he had painted it himself and personally imported the engine. Then the driver announced they were approaching Kingston Street, and once they passed it, they would be in Essex territory. Vanessa fell silent and looked down, and a memory of something she had overheard as a child came rushing back. A maid telling her uncle that the accident happened in Kingston, that the carriage had overturned, and both of them. And the sentence was never completed, but she had carried the weight of those unfinished words ever since. Back in the present, she told herself everything was fine and that nothing was going to happen. Then the car braked hard, and she lurched forward in surprise. Meanwhile, in a horse carriage on a completely different road, Theodore was reading the investigation results he had requested regarding Vanessa Somerset, and what it said was by no means nothing. About a month before the late Count Somerset died under suspicious circumstances, the inheritance was suddenly redirected to the current count, and the documents were full of suspicious details, and the lawyer who signed as notary had vanished without a trace. The investigator said there was much left to uncover and would continue following up. Theodore folded the letter and tucked it inside his coat. He quietly said to himself that Vanessa really should aim that gun at someone entirely different. The weight of what he implied by that statement settled over the carriage just like the weather. Back on Kingston Street, Vanessa was lying unconscious inside the car with blood on her head and the road utterly quiet around her. Vanessa woke up with blood on one side of her face and Mary calling her name in panic. And before Mary could even finish checking on her, Vanessa asked if she was hurt, which was exactly the kind of person she was, worrying about everyone else while bleeding from her forehead. Mary said she was fine, but her forehead needed care. And Vanessa said she was fine and wanted to know what happened. Mary said some madman must have rushed out in front of the car and told her to wait while she went to check. Outside the car, the driver stood over a man lying on the ground, muttering about why he had to rush out in this place of all places. And Vanessa knelt down and asked if he could move. The man raised his head with a cry of pain, and Mary pulled Vanessa back before her clothes got more blood on them. But Vanessa told her they had to call a doctor immediately because the man was clearly injured. Then the man on the ground began talking, saying he knew that car and knew the engine sound, the color, and every little detail. And if they wanted him to keep his mouth shut, they needed to give him more money because he had done this kind of work before, and as long as they paid, he would do whatever was asked. Vanessa stared at him and asked what on earth he was. Then 2 police officers ran up, and one of them pulled him up off the ground, telling him he was up to his tricks again, while the other officer explained to Mary and Vanessa that this wasn't his first time, that he frequently threw himself in front of fancy-colored cars to extort money from drivers. Vanessa said, but he was definitely bleeding a lot, and the officer explained he kept blood in a small pouch and squirted it on himself, then told them to have a safe trip and walked off. Mary said she knew right away he was definitely a scammer, before turning to the more urgent issue of Vanessa's ruined dress, and what Count Rowden would think when she arrived looking like this. But Vanessa was not thinking about the dress, nor was she thinking about Count Rowden, because she noticed something in his hand, a necklace. And Mary asked where it came from, and Vanessa said the man must have dropped it. Then she looked at it, and the world narrowed down to a single memory of her father holding it up, telling her it was beautiful, saying he would have a small portrait painted inside so that wherever and whenever he missed her, he could see her face. And the warmth of that memory and the weight of what that necklace meant while standing here on Kingston Street of all places hit her all at once. She looked at Mary and told her they needed to find a phone and send word to Essex that an emergency had occurred and she wouldn't be able to come. Mary yelled, "What?" But Vanessa had already started walking, telling her she had a place she needed to go right now. And when Mary asked where, she said, "Gloucester, to my uncle's," and she continued walking with the necklace and the portrait of herself and her parents tightly gripped in her hand like something she was not ready to lose again. Meanwhile, at Count Essex's mansion, Theodore sat opposite the Count and Edgar while a letter was being reviewed. The Count said this was not something he could answer alone, and asked if he could call the family's investment specialist. And Theodore told him to go ahead, and the Count stepped outside, leaving Edgar looking at Theodore and asking if he really intended to build a racetrack in the South just for a single woman. Theodore said he had considered between the East and the South from the beginning, and profits would be comparable, so he simply prioritized his own convenience. Edgar asked if he really intended to marry this mystery woman of his. Theodore thought of her calling him River, just that one word, the way she always said it as if it were the most natural thing in the world. But he said aloud that marrying Vanessa Siren Somerset would be the greatest mockery of his honor, and the biggest joke the Battenberg name had ever suffered. He laughed to himself, the way he said it so resolute as if he were trying very hard to convince himself that he was a bastard. In his heart, Liam harbored calculations far grander than his modest station as a sailor. He leisurely took a sip of tea and replied clearly, "No." Edgar questioned him about throwing money out the window just to invest in this barren wasteland, only to not even bother marrying the young lady he had set his sights on. Liam still maintained his callous demeanor, asserting that marriage brought no benefits whatsoever. However, he revealed that if this business venture succeeded, Lady Somerset would become the wealthiest person in the entire region. And then she would never have to worry about being married off to those vile, lowly men again. Saying this, Liam gently gritted his teeth. Just as he guarded the beauty of that memory, he wanted to keep her carefree in her own world, enjoying the freedom she loved. And that was enough for Liam. To him, she was a pure existence he never wished to drag down into the mud. Liam told Edgar that such financial compensation was enough to make up for causing her misunderstandings. Edgar, with a face full of worry and moral concern, asked if he was going to disclose the scale of the business he was promoting. Naturally, he was not. Exhausted from trying to make sense of the Duke's logic, his cousin held his head and lamented, "Theodore, you are truly going to regret this." Yet Liam cared little about that. He merely asked him to say his name once more. The request sounded so bizarre that Edgar had to confirm it again. The moment the name Theodore was uttered, it was instantly processed by the Duke's mind. He compared it to the breathless sound echoing from Vanessa's lips whenever they were intimate. Her voice always held him spellbound, leaving Liam momentarily lost in thought. He shook his head and muttered, "Why is that?" In all seriousness, the Duke murmured, "Hearing you call my name just sounds completely wrong." And on the other side of the story, Vanessa's world was exceedingly narrow and quiet. She gently held the necklace she had just retrieved. Her shaken demeanor made Mary anxious. "Should I call the master for you, my lady?" Vanessa pressed her lips together in thought, her glistening eyes brimming with emotion, her deep contemplation giving the young lady's face a poignant, pitiful look. She calmly replied, "No, Mary. Before I question my uncle, I need to confirm a few things." Reason slowly pieced together the vague speculations lingering in her mind. The necklace in her hand. It was no coincidence that it had ended up with that scoundrel. Vanessa decisively returned to her room after dismissing Mary from her service. Standing alone in the hallway, Mary suddenly detected a familiar sound, her eyes turning sharp and cold. The maid stood there, dutifully awaiting orders. Her master's voice called out from behind, "Mary!" With an arrogant swagger, the Count opened his arms to welcome her. "There you are!" A half-smile formed on the castle master's lips, yet it failed to dispel the chill in his eyes. "I was just about to call for you." They quickly concluded a private tryst in Count Somerset's bedroom, and Mary was surprised by the generous sum of money she received after their pleasure, far more handsome than usual. Her master grinned cheerfully after satisfying his carnal desires, concealing nothing. "Today, I just received a splendid business proposal." His tone disgusted Mary so much that she frowned. Yet the moment he pulled her close and made a lavish promise, "If everything goes smoothly, I might just make you a countess," the tension around the waist he had roughly grabbed softened. She shuddered at her master's kiss on the nape of her neck, silently listening as he added in a stern tone, "Just stay obedient like this." Nevertheless, Mary could not help but be wary when he questioned Vanessa's schedule today, asking why they had turned back while on their way to Essex. Mary rose from the bed and replied that the young lady had been feeling unwell since last night and was further shaken after the carriage incident. Mary weighed her words upon hearing the Count's question, "Has she been acting unusual lately?" She recalled Vanessa's contemplative gaze when abruptly returning to the manor after encountering that blackmailer on the street. Feeling the need to protect the young lady's secret, Mary said nothing was out of the ordinary, that her mistress demanded little and behaved quite normally. Yet this report displeased her master. His eyes flared with anger. "Is that so? There is no new man she has been seeing?" Mary denied it, but this did not fool Somerset. He growled, "I despise liars the most." Instantly, he turned violent toward the young woman he had just caressed. "You crazy bitch!" Ignoring Mary's wincing pain as he grabbed her hair, he glared and demanded, "Did Vanessa bribe you to keep your mouth shut?" "Did you just say there was no man? Then how on earth did Vanessa manage to meet the Duke of Battenberg, and where did they meet?" Little Vanessa began piecing together fragmented memories. Over the telephone, she spoke in a cautious voice. I understand that the legal advisor was changed at some point. The person I am looking for is our family's original advisor. On the other end of the line, a man replied, Lady Vanessa, does the Count know that you are running around investigating this matter? Vanessa shook her head. He does not know yet, but I will speak to him soon. If you could just tell me who drafted the original will. She lowered her voice. I will never disturb you again, I swear on my honor. On the other end, the man agreed after a moment's hesitation. Please wait a moment. Moments later, Vanessa jotted down the information she had obtained onto a small slip of paper and thanked him. The name she received was Viscount B. Dawson. She thought intently. If it was him, perhaps he would know something. For a little caged bird, flying out to uncover the truth was no easy task, as finding an excuse to go out without her uncle's surveillance was exceedingly difficult. Having troubled Rosaline so frequently, she could no longer ask for her help. As she was lost in thought, her uncle's deep voice resonated. Vanessa. He had been standing behind her for who knew how long, quietly observing her. Her uncle's gaze was as icy as ever, and she softly replied, Yes, uncle. He walked attentively beside Vanessa. Living under the same roof, yet we rarely take a walk together. Van, you look a bit pale lately. I have been feeling unwell lately, but I am feeling better now. She remained as terrified of her uncle as ever. The Count suddenly announced that her wedding would be postponed, news that made Vanessa startle in disbelief. Her uncle abruptly changed his stance regarding the old man to whom he had just sold his niece, claiming that Rawdon's reputation was far too vile to tarnish the Somerset name. Vanessa's uncle added that he would spend this entire winter conducting business in the capital, presenting Vanessa with another opportunity. That was to socialize with high society. And with any luck, his niece might snare a far more lucrative catch than old Rawdon. Vanessa felt utterly disgusted upon discerning her uncle's intentions. Backing out of a deal for a despicable man like him could only mean he had found a far more lucrative price. Yet that also meant the merchandise had gained value, and had he not just mentioned socializing? Vanessa seized the opportunity to ask permission to attend an aristocratic banquet aboard a cruise ship. She mentioned seeing their family name on the guest list, omitting, of course, that the name Dawson was also among them. Her reasoning was that it would serve as an enriching experience before heading to the capital, though her uncle felt he was far too busy to waste money on such romantic indulgences. Vanessa pinned high hopes on her argument, asserting that aboard Ingram's grandest cruise ship, there would surely be numerous noble gentlemen. She added that rumors suggested even the Duke of Battenberg or perhaps the king himself might attend, words that successfully lured her uncle. Under Vanessa's expectant gaze, Count Somerset pondered for a moment. Stroking his meticulously trimmed beard, he murmured, "The Duke of Battenberg?" A discreet smirk formed on his lips as he instructed, "Go with Rosaline, and make sure you conduct yourself properly." Vanessa joyfully thanked her uncle, though she was not the only one rejoicing. This vile old man was thrilled that his naive niece had brought home a catch as massive as Battenberg. As usual, Vanessa visited the wooden cottage, where the little dog looked at her with sheer delight. She sat and counted the days she had not seen River, and in the coming days while attending the ship banquet, they would not see each other either. That yearning filled Vanessa with dread. What if he never returned? This was the first time they had been apart for so long, and she had to stop herself from taking these emotions to heart, as they were not truly lovers. She stroked the puppy to find solace. Lacking the status of a lover, she would have no right to reproach him even if he abandoned her. Even so, she still yearned for their contract to last longer, confiding her self-justification to the dog. After all, summer is not over yet. Just at that moment, her summer leisurely approached. The soft footsteps of a tall, broad-shouldered man tapped a steady rhythm against the small wooden bridge. With reddened eyes, Vanessa turned back and stared intently at him. Her emotions could not be concealed, resembling an abandoned puppy that had just been found by its master, as a warm, deep voice called out, "Vanessa." It was truly him. With an indifferent yet remarkably gentle demeanor, he asked, "What are you doing out here?" Vanessa smiled as she looked at him, her hand remaining motionless on the puppy's face, leaving it panting eagerly for more petting. River's captivating face paired with his teasing words left her flustered. "Were you waiting for me?" True to his promise, after his journey, he brought back numerous gifts for her. As he unfastened the bag, he listened to her chatter. The servants say a gentleman has moved into the abandoned villa nearby. Rumor has it he is a young naval officer. Liam merely smiled as he listened to the young woman sitting on his bed recount what had transpired in his absence, speaking of a wealthy, high-ranking man who had furnished a lavish estate with extravagant goods in this region. Having finally laid out all the gifts prepared for her, he remarked with amusement, "I never thought you paid attention to such idle gossip." Vanessa's eyes widened as she looked at what he held in his hand. It was the very pouch she had lost on the night they went to the circus. Vanessa joyfully received it, listening as he explained that the police had recovered it. However, when she excitedly mentioned that Rosaline and Blair's birthdays were approaching, and that she planned to replace their gifts, Liam's eyes narrowed slightly, his smile cooling. Vanessa checked inside the pouch and found that the brooch meant for Blair was missing. She sighed in regret that it was the only item missing among the gifts, while Liam turned his head away with a sly look. Still, he managed to feign sympathy. "Yes, you are right, what a pity." Reunited after days apart, she cheerfully told him that she would be attending the banquet on the cruise ship. Lowering her head anxiously, Vanessa confessed that the purpose of the trip was to network with high society, and that there were also matters she needed to investigate. Her man approved of the outing, his hand rustling softly inside his coat pocket. He then withdrew an object, causing Vanessa's eyes to widen at what appeared before her. Make no mistake, it was a genuine gift, a necklace adorned with an exquisite blue diamond. Sitting down beside her, he asked if she recognized the jewelry. It was not hard for Vanessa to know of it, having seen it in the newspapers. It was a piece from the De Beers Company under the Battenberg family, and even if what lay in her hands were an imitation, it would still be exceptionally expensive. Picking it up, he declared that she should use it to draw the attention of other men, to safeguard her honor. Though it sounded ridiculous, he fastened the necklace around her neck while saying, "Men are very simple creatures, Vanessa." With the air of experience, her river stated that they all craved things that were expensive or appeared to be so. Vanessa replied shyly, "Even without such things, I would still do just fine." Yet in truth, possessing it would make things far easier for her. With the luxurious Battenberg brand gracing her neck, vulgar men would instinctively stay away. Understanding this, the weight of the necklace upon her throat made Vanessa hesitate. Lifting the pendant, he instructed, "Make sure you wear it." For immediately after, the young man leaned down and pressed a kiss upon it as if claiming ownership. He wanted her to shine brighter than anyone else. And soon enough, the high society vessel set sail a few days later. Rosaline accompanied Vanessa, reassuring her not to be anxious. Yet the little Rose wondered why Vanessa had brought along a leather briefcase to a party. Vanessa stammered, but her best friend laughed it off, remarking that an unrefined ensemble was only natural, and that people would overlook it for a debutante who had never made her entrance. Rosaline even thought that such an innocent persona would prove captivating to men. Vanessa, however, was preoccupied with figuring out how to approach Viscount Dawson. And by sheer serendipity, they suddenly caught someone's attention as a gentleman approached to greet them. Rosaline's eyes lit up as she exclaimed, "Logan Dawson!" The newcomer tipped his hat and cordially greeted Vanessa as well. He reminded them that they had studied together at the academy for 3 whole years. Of course, Vanessa had not forgotten, but she stared blankly at the young man before her. Could the name Dawson belong to Viscount Dawson's family? Rosaline astutely noticed Logan's shyness, as well as the dazed expression on her best friend's face. With a knowing look, the little Rose stood up to take her leave. "Take your time catching up. I have a small matter to attend to and will be right back." Not letting the opportunity slip away, Vanessa immediately spoke up. "Logan." The young man gazed upon the exquisite lady before him, whose enchanting beauty and melodious voice seemed to render any other thought meaningless. Vanessa's request snapped Logan back to reality as she asked to meet Lord Benjamin Dawson. Logan was surprised that he was not the one she was looking for, but rather his grandfather. He mentioned that his grandfather was also aboard this voyage, news that caused Vanessa to cover her mouth in utter joy. Overjoyed, she rushed forward and grasped Logan's hand, crying out, "Thank goodness!" while the young gentleman flushed in embarrassment. Vanessa pressed on, explaining that she needed Benjamin because he had once worked with her late father. Logan froze at such close contact, while not far behind them stood several naval officers. One of them overheard that the young man was about to escort the lady inside. Sipping his liquor, the stranger pressed his lips together in irritation. The gaze of none other than the Somerset Estates gardener had been fixed on Vanessa the entire time. Though separated by only a short distance, he could not step forward and pull her back. Liam inwardly grumbled. "After all the trouble I went through to brand you, you really are something else, Vanessa." Vanessa never knew that someone had been shielding the very birdcage imprisoning her, quietly helping to uncover the secrets she sought. Shortly after, Vanessa followed Logan into the passenger cabin, where Logan found himself captivated by the exquisite piece around her neck. Vanessa bashfully explained that it was an imitation gifted by a friend. She genuinely believed so, despite its extraordinary craftsmanship. Yet Logan seemed rather surprised, likely taking it as modest understatement. Approaching his grandfather's room, Logan reminded Vanessa to be somewhat cautious. Surprised by Logan's solemn expression, she questioned him, but from behind, a gentleman had silently approached them. Hearing his name called, Logan felt a touch of apprehension. And the man who made him tread so carefully was none other than Lord Benjamin. Vanessa likewise felt intimidated by the stern demeanor of the veteran legal counselor. She had managed to meet him with unexpected ease, the man himself, Viscount Dawson. Thanks to Logan's assistance, she was granted an audience with him, and as they sat by the beverage counter, Lord Benjamin was curious why this young lady had sought him out. Little Vanessa timidly produced a small object, her father's pendant necklace. The elderly man showed sharp insight, instantly recognizing the item in the young lady's hands. Vanessa confirmed it, adding that this keepsake had remained with her father until the very moment tragedy struck. Even so, she still wanted Lord Dawson to verify that she was not mistaken. The old gentleman received the necklace with great care. Under Vanessa's watchful gaze, he inspected it for a long while with the seasoned habit of an experienced jurist. In the end, he confirmed that he had seen this object many times before. For this very item was what the late young count used to boast about whenever they met, turning from a composed gentleman into a bragging father whenever speaking of his little daughter. The memory of how deeply Count Somerset cherished the child had left a profound impression on Lord Dawson. Vanessa exclaimed in deep emotion, "He really did that?" Having confirmed that the gentleman before her was indeed the legal advisor from back then, Vanessa began placing several crucial documents from her briefcase onto the table. The purported will of her father was presented, a handwritten copy transcribed by Vanessa, as the original was kept in court custody. Benjamin was rather astonished by the meticulousness of the dossier, while Vanessa shared that she found several clauses quite unusual. Hoping to meet a sympathetic ear, she explained that certain points appeared altered from the original, and that she needed a seasoned expert on inheritance law. Yet in that capacity, Benjamin's answer was that he could not casually intervene in this matter. For matters concerning the honor and confidentiality of former clients were not things he could arbitrarily disclose. While he sympathized with the young woman's desperation, as an attorney, certain principles had to be upheld at all costs. And Vanessa felt the door had slammed shut before her eyes. Her eyes dropped, a feeling of helplessness washing over her petite frame. In the end, she had to conclude the meeting swiftly, both to avoid being discovered and to spare herself further humiliation. Although she had resolved to remain resilient throughout these trials. The truth was not so easily uncovered. She thought she might have to try again next time. Just as she was about to head back to her cabin to rest, a few drunken men stumbled past, deliberately sloshing a glass of wine onto Vanessa's bare shoulder. Feigning shock, the man addressed her. "Look at your dress!" Jolted back to reality, Vanessa watched her terrible day unfold as her gown was thoroughly stained. She stated that she would clean it herself in a lounge. But the man slyly suggested that the nearby lounges were currently out of service. A brief notice had indeed been received by them, and part of it seemed to be true. The young lady was rather flustered. After all, she was no worldly transmigrator, merely an innocent young noblewoman facing such harassment for the first time. Seizing the chance, the man offered, "Well, if you like, I could escort you to another lounge." Just as the words left his mouth, the heavy, forceful footsteps of another gentleman approached. Those resolute strides instantly made the scoundrel falter. The newcomer spoke in a leisurely yet utterly commanding tone. My, it seems this young lady has run into a bit of trouble." Vanessa looked at him. Dressed in unfamiliar attire, he appeared truly unfamiliar in this moment. Theodore's customary smile drew near her face as he playfully asked, "Need any help?" The entire rabble found themselves completely overwhelmed by this lone officer. Vanessa now fixed her gaze solely upon the man she believed she currently possessed. River, Why are you here? Amidst the scrutinizing stares of the surrounding crowd, he did not seem to care in the slightest. He merely gave his young lady an expectant look, signaling that they should find a quiet spot to speak in private. For the appearance of this striking couple had already aroused the curiosity of many onlookers, who would surely not leave them in peace. In her fluster, Vanessa gently pulled him away, and they soon arrived at his private quarters. The moment they entered the room, Theodore's playful smirk vanished as he spoke impatiently. I know, but does that even matter? His hand cupped her cheek, forcing her to face him. Hearing the impatient click of the door lock behind him, Vanessa felt that this day had dragged on far too long. He continued interrogating her. What a pity. Was not sparking a scandal with a man exactly what you wanted? What reason is there to hide like this? Vanessa looked at the visibly irritated young man, feeling even more exhausted. Theodore averted his gaze, having never before shown such a harsh side of himself. Vanessa merely murmured, "Still, it is wonderful to see you here." Theodore instantly shot a glance at her. She smiled softly. "Did you receive an invitation just like the other sailors?" Vanessa had no idea who this sailor truly was, even though he had let slip the name Theo previously. He remarked that her sorrowful expression hardly looked like joy at seeing him, but Vanessa denied that he was the cause. Theodore suddenly reached out to lift the necklace from the nape of her neck, the electric touch from his finely gloved hand sending a jolt through Vanessa. She stammered softly, insisting she was not upset because of him. She explained that she had encountered some troubling matters, and Lord Theodore demanded the details. He shifted his grip to hold her delicate hand, listening as she continued. "I will tell you once everything becomes clearer. But more importantly, River..." Her words were like a lump of ice forced down his throat. "From now on, in front of others, let us not act as though we know each other." Theodore withdrew his hand, his eyes dropping. She quickly amended that this request was only necessary until the cruise ended. He demanded a reason, but putting it into words was far too humiliating for her. Was she not here seeking a wealthy prospect at her uncle's bidding? And what was more, something she had never confessed to him, was that she did not want to ruin the sailor's reputation now that she had fallen in love with him. Yet he seemed utterly displeased with being pushed aside, his expression darkening as never before. "Are you perhaps too busy concocting scandalous rumors with other men?" His hand struck the door lightly in an effort to restrain himself upon hearing her explain that she merely did not want him dragged into trouble. She urged him to keep a low profile, but Theodore had completely lost his patience. "Vanessa." Leaning down close to her face, he demanded with suppressed urgency, "Your lover is standing right before you, yet you intend to walk away and meet another man?" Vanessa's expression turned sheepish, saying that makes me sound completely shameless. But he seized upon the terms of their contract, which she claimed she had always honored. Yet without her realizing it, the man had gradually wrapped his arms around her. He murmured in a bitter tone, "Faithful to the terms, are you?" With no way left to avoid his piercing gaze, his demeanor left her feeling utterly bewildered. Lifting her chin, he softly commanded, "Vanessa, then kiss me." Unable to suppress her curiosity, she blurted out, "Are you angry?" Her rational interpretation of his attitude carried a silent yearning that he would continue until every suppressed emotion was laid bare. But Theodore did not indulge her, asking instead, "Angry?" Pulling back slightly and regaining his composure, he asked, "Why would you think that?" Hiding nothing, Vanessa looked up with crystal-clear eyes and said, "Because you keep looking at me like that, as though you have fallen in love with me." An invisible blow struck the center of the Duke's chest, making him frown. In a room heavy with intimacy, they had strictly drawn the line that this was purely a physical arrangement. Theo questioned his own heart. Love? He was truly expressing genuine anger, not love. He was furious that she had taken such reckless risks earlier, associating with Logan Dawson and the scandalous gossip that could arise. Naively carrying around that conspicuously obtained will, pouring her heart out to a stranger while her uncle had an extensive web of spies everywhere. He was enraged that he could not enclose that naive girl within the palm of his hand. His girl was as small and defenseless as a newborn fawn without any strength to fight back. And could this overwhelming concern he felt for her truly be called love? Theodore could not admit it. He could not comprehend it, nor could he burden her with further trouble. He replied, "No." Lowering his head, his voice strained with forbearance. I am sorry, but… Vanessa stood frozen, watching him expectantly, and he merely said, I want you right now. Theodore had never believed in love or family. He had always despised the frantic quarrels of his parents after they had come together in the name of love. To him, what was that concept other than disguising pure lust as something noble? To Theodore, it was always a deception, and his feelings for Vanessa could be no different. Yet he still constantly yearned to imprint his mark upon that young woman's world. He wished for the entire world to know that she belonged to him. Theodore's gaze burned with intense possessiveness as he looked at her. Her enchanting allure must never catch the eye of any other filthy man. The sultry breath with which she called a name that was not his also satisfied him. He wished this summer would last forever. Yet he also wished these feverish days would soon come to an end, so that everything might return to its rightful place. He wished that his Vanessa would forever remain standing there, in that May garden alone. For he thought that even if his memory were to fade, the image of that gentle young lady in the garden was truly beautiful. In that moment, he wished time would stand still. Right now, Theodore simply wanted to possess everything, her and her entire world all to himself. Little Vanessa had no idea she was the prize goldfish in the unfamiliar Duke's grand calculations. Lord Battenberg had invested a massive fortune into the Southern project under a private agreement with Count Somerset. Vanessa read the words scrolling before her eyes, one line stating that she herself was the price for that transaction. The young woman was horrified to find herself proclaimed across the newspapers, bought at an exorbitant price by a man she had never even known. Vanessa read it over and over again to see if there was any mistake. But Mary added that rumors claimed the young lady had been intimate with the Duke aboard the ship and was caught in the act. Mary said the Duke had boarded the cruise for business, and by coincidence such rumors had spread. Vanessa could not answer Mary's questions, utterly bewildered by what was unfolding. She confirmed to Mary that it was completely unfounded, as she had never even met Lord Battenberg. And for that very reason, the whole affair was exceedingly strange. Mary grew all the more curious, and Vanessa racked her brain, trying to make sense of it all. She wondered if River's military demeanor had caused people to mistake him for the Duke of Battenberg. Nevertheless, it proved to be tremendously advantageous news for Vanessa, as she had successfully sparked rumors of an affair with such a grand catch. Consequently, other men would leave her alone for a while, her uncle would be satisfied, and River would remain undetected. Just then, another maid entered to make an announcement. Vanessa had a phone call from Lyndon. On the other end of the line was Logan, warmly greeting her. Logan laughed, blushing even over the phone as he expressed regret over her abrupt disappearance the other day. She sincerely thanked Logan for his concern, explaining that she had met up with Rosaline and returned to rest without encountering any trouble. After a moment, Logan got straight to the point, asking if she was all right after being named in the newspapers. He admitted he had grown worried the moment he saw the necklace bearing the Battenberg hallmark. Vanessa was rather surprised as the disparate pieces began falling into place. The necklace resembling a piece from the Battenberg jewelry house and the Duke's unprofitable investment in a remote town had formed a pincer movement aimed squarely at her. Logan astutely reminded Vanessa, even if the necklace is an imitation, perhaps we should still question the one who gave it to you. The young girl was stunned that what she desperately resisted believing was firmly affirmed by an outsider. Logan maintained that this was a deliberate scheme, not ruling out malicious intent. Logan also reminded her of the newspapers owned by his family. According to his sources, someone had intentionally leaked this story about the Duke, who had always kept out of the public eye. And this made Logan worry for Vanessa all the more. And in truth, the mastermind behind it all was smiling with deep satisfaction as he read the newspaper. He was pleased to have helped Vanessa spread the rumor of a scandalous man, simultaneously marking his possession over her before any other suitor dared eye the flower in his rose garden.